My name is Holly Love. I'm from WHP 580 and 1340 WRAW, otherwise known as an iHeartRadio company. So I am going to be your MC for the next 2 hours, and I feel like I'm the opening act for the opening acts of the opening acts, and then there's RJ tonight, so he will be here tonight. So in all seriousness, this week alone, public safety was the #1 headline up until yesterday, specifically in schools. It's a very important panel that I'm about to introduce, but here to moderate it is somebody that has been really in Pennsylvania for some time and making a name for herself. So please welcome the moderator for this fantastic panel, Director of Pennsylvania's Americans for Prosperity, Ashley Klingensmith.
Well, it is so wonderful to be back at PLC, a signature event that boasts some of PA's happiest warriors. It's so good to see you all. If you don't know about Americans for Prosperity, we have just celebrated our 13th anniversary in operation in the Commonwealth. And so for those of you who have been an integral part of our team, I just saw Bob Howard and so many others, thank you so much. For those of you unfamiliar, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots organization with a full-time, year-round infrastructure across the Commonwealth. We really work to lift the government-erected barriers that are keeping people from realizing their version of the American dream. And so that's what motivates us each and every day to do the work we do in Harrisburg, across the river, but also in Washington. Whether it's Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or right here in Palmyra, Pennsylvanians are feeling the impact of violent crime. 2 headlines I read just this week read, Temple University president resigns as Philadelphia crime concerns wreak havoc on enrollment. Another headline, another business owner on the verge of fleeing downtown as crime continues. That business is Fragrasso Financial Advisors in Pittsburgh, who have been a staple downtown in Pittsburgh now for over 5 decades. What we've all endured over the past few years is a global pandemic, massive unemployment caused by business closures, rapid inflation, but also increasing violent crime. Homicides between 2019 and 2020 was the largest single-year increase in U.S. history, and crimes like aggravated assault and vehicle theft also skyrocketed. While we know that overall crime rates in Pennsylvania have declined by about 14%, violent crimes, including homicide, have risen. 2021 saw a record high number of homicides in Philadelphia at 562. 2022 wasn't too far behind with 516. Homicide is the 8th most likely cause of death for a Philadelphian. Violent crime data shows that right here in Harrisburg, 23 homicides occurred in 2022, the most in at least 36 years, and at a higher rate per population than both Philly and Pittsburgh. At AFP, we have long supported smart on crime, soft on taxpayer reforms at both the state and federal level, and just cannot ignore the need to work on advancing policies to get our criminal justice system restored to one that protects people and preserves public safety as its core function. There are certain solutions that cities and the General Assembly right across the river can prioritize today to reduce and even prevent violent crime, rather than just try to respond to it after a victim has already been harmed. Today, you're going to be encouraged about opportunities policymakers can take to better protect Pennsylvanians and honor the sacrifice of our brave members of law enforcement. So first, we're going to start with Mr. Jaron Smith. He is a partner at Denton's Global Advisors. He's been a champion of pushing for policies that create positive change for forgotten Americans. Prior to his current role, he served as President Trump's highest and longest-ranking African-American advisor. He was instrumental in passing a criminal justice reform bill that freed thousands and reunited people with their families. A policy and congressional connoisseur, Mr. Smith has played a dynamic role in policy development and social change in the DC metropolitan area through his service in the nonprofit and political sectors. His extensive knowledge and ability have proven an invaluable asset to Congressman Scalise, Congressman Jordan, along with Senator Tim Scott, Vice President Mike Pence, all of whom Jerron served during his career. To highlight the remarkable work he's done, he was awarded the 2020 Bipartisan Justice Award. Most recently, he launched a public safety coalition to reduce violent crime. The principles of this initiative work to counter the defund the police movement and offer proven solutions to the current failing criminal justice system. So we are so happy to welcome you to PLC and to Pennsylvania. Couple of questions for you, and then the floor is yours for a few minutes. Would you please share what brought you to prioritize criminal justice issues in the Trump administration? And would you share what inspired you to launch the Public Safety Coalition to reduce violent crime? Last, would you touch on the biggest state success tackling violent crime you've seen in the past year?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Pennsylvania. It's a blessing to be in front of all of you at PLC. So what inspired me to care about the issue of criminal justice reform and work on it is the community I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I look at public safety as being the #1 issue when it comes to revitalizing a community. Without public safety, you don't get economic investment, you don't get access to opportunity, you even have failing schools and bad economic development. And so we're able to do things around public safety, there's a domino effect. But also in creating public safety, if you're able to holistically work on things like education and workforce, that also brings down crime. And I wrote a little bit about that in a book that I have coming out called Underserved, which talks about the narrative and the work that President Trump led on around underserved communities. But it was after I left the Trump administration in my community in Washington, D.C., where I saw violent crime firsthand, and I had just had twins. And with that crime, I was worried about my own family's public safety, especially since I travel the country a lot trying to promote solutions to revitalize communities. So I had to make the decision to move my family to a safer community, but I realized that most people don't have that decision right to up and leave. Some people are trapped in those communities. And so in doing so, I got back with some of the partners that worked on the legislation, the First Step Act, which focused on reducing recidivism, reducing the amount of people who would return to prison, because that would promote public safety. And so partners like Americans for Prosperity, Stand Together, Right on Crime, the Pelican Institute, as well as leaders like Alice Johnson, major city chiefs, we formed the Public Safety Solutions for America. And you can find out more about our work at endviolentcrime.com. But we focus on 4 principles: funding the police. We also was able to get Mayor Suarez involved, and he showed us, why funding the police is so important. Because during this era where we have a rise in violent crime, Mayor Suarez showed the leadership by reinvesting in this police and technology. And as a result, you see a place like Miami that has the lowest murder rate they've had in 50 years, even though their population has blown up. Second principle was being able to focus on solving violent crime and preventing it. Police spend about 7% of their time able to do that job, and we want them to spend more of their time on those issues. But they get pulled in many of the directions, working on issues like mental health, being a social worker in the neighborhood. And so we think that we can find some unique solutions to have police kind of prioritize their time on solving and preventing violent crime. But recently, I can answer this question about where I see it's working twice, because I just came back from Dallas. In Dallas, we've also seen some huge dips in violent crime. And it's because the Dallas Chief of Police, Chief Garcia, is using our 3rd principle, evidence-based solutions to solve violent crime. His literal strategy is hotspotting, meaning going to the areas where we have the worst crime and kind of figuring out a strategy around those hotspots. Also doing things like cleaning up blight of the community, making sure there's the proper lighting in communities. And then lastly, using a strategy called Focused Deterrence, where he works with community leaders, ex-gang members who actually want to clean up their neighborhood, and they've put a strategy together to work with the police and get rid of the bad guys in the neighborhood. And that's shown very much a lot of progress and a decrease in violent crime in a place like Dallas. And then lastly, we promote continually to invest in smart on crime solutions, which is, of course, not defund the police, but it also isn't just locking up people for the rest of their lives and throwing away the key, because we've seen that not to work as well. But having nuanced solutions that looks at the problem and not put a one-size-fits-all approach on all criminals, because there are some first-time nonviolent individuals who we can maybe use tools to help empower them so that we have more resources to focus on violent criminals. And that's shown success in Dallas, and has also shown success in Miami as well as Boston. And so we're continuing a city tour to promote those solutions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming to PA. Yes. So next, I'm thrilled to welcome my colleague and Nittany Lion, Greg Glod. Greg serves as the Senior Criminal Justice Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. Based in Arlington, Virginia, Greg is an attorney who began his legal career as a law clerk for the Circuit Court in Maryland. He subsequently practiced at a litigation firm in Annapolis before joining Right on Crime and the Texas Public Policy Foundation as the Director of State Initiatives and Criminal Justice. In 2010, he graduated from the Pennsylvania State University with BA degrees in Crime Law and Justice and Political Science. In 2013, he received his JD from the University of Maryland School of Law, and in 2017, he was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list for law and policy. So Greg, it is fantastic to welcome you back to PA.
Thank you.
You just recently noted in the Washington Examiner that it is time for our leaders and communities to set aside differences and tackle this problem of violent crime with evidence-based solutions like our lives depend on it, because they actually do. I'd value your digging into the 4 principles Jerron just mentioned for the Public Safety Coalition, and can you touch on where Pennsylvania has kind of got it right?
Yeah, sure. No, and as you said, Ashley, thank you. It's always great to be back in the Keystone State. I was a Penn State alumnus, and now unfortunately live in DC, so it's always good to get back here as quickly as I possibly can. And similar to Jerron, I lived in Northeast DC and had to move to Northwest during the pandemic because of the rising in violent crime. Wife taking the dog out midday afternoon, huge fight broke out, knives were there. We said that's the end of that, but obviously, not everyone has that opportunity to be able to move out of that place. So I want to find those evidence-based solutions that help lift everyone up as much as we can. You said that, local leaders have to get together and figure this out. And as much as the state legislature is important, Mr. Jones over here, and the federal legislation is important, the president's important, your local leadership, particularly when it comes to crime, is the most paramount aspect of how reduction happens. So Jerron just mentioned Dallas, and Dallas is one of the top 10 most populous cities in the country, and it's the only one that has had 2 years in a row of decreasing in violent crime. Austin has had increases in violent crime. Houston has had an increase in violent crime. It's the same state laws. What's going on in Dallas? They have a mayor, they have a police chief, and they have a city council that all came up with the crazy solution that crime is bad, which is actually a very crazy thing to say in some of these cities, and we're gonna have evidence-based solutions to actually impact it. And the places that we have seen these reductions are those places that has that local leadership all working in lockstep. And so I can dig in a little bit more with Dallas and what they've done. So essentially, like Jerron said, they've done this thing called hotspot policing. So they took an audit of the entire city, and they microgridded it. It's about 2 football fields is a microgrid, and they have about 100,000 of them in Dallas. And they said, these 54 are about 15 to 20% of our violent crime and where it's happening. And then you even go down into social cohorts and the social groups. As rampant as violent crime looks, you actually only have about 1% of your populations committing about 60 to 70% of the violent crime. So you're able to say where it's happening and who is doing it. And you're able to target these areas and essentially do a triage at first. And that's why they've been able to decrease violent crime across the board the last 2 years. Not only that, they've decreased arrests the last 2 years. And so they're actually decreasing the criminal justice system. So if you're concerned about the expansion of the criminal justice system and prisons, they're actually able to focus resources a lot better and get better results out of it. And so that's what Dallas has done, places like Miami, Boston. Again, you're in a very blue state over there, but the local leadership there has been doing this for decades. And in Boston, they had about 40 murders last year. In a place like Baltimore that has about 100,000 less people, they had 333. What is the difference? It's local leadership, a dedication to this, and actually taking through. And so that has been the major components of a lot of these different things. So, and actually, you brought up Pennsylvania, there are places and opportunities now that's happening in Pennsylvania. So as bad as Philadelphia has been, and that's on a scale that you can't even discuss at this point, and I'm sure we'll get more into that, there is little glimmers of hope where they've been able to at least do things at a smaller scale and have like focused deterrence policies. It's obviously on a small population, but they've seen really good results. Just last year, the Harrisburg City Council was able to pass a resolution to start implementing a lot of these focused deterrence policies within Harrisburg, and we are seeing the results of that. Harrisburg actually does a very good job on clearing murders, and that's something that they've really focused on. In the 1960s, 90% of homicides were cleared, meaning they were solved, the suspect is dead, or something else has occurred. That is about down to 50% nationally now. And so not only is half of violent crimes never reported, half of them are never even solved. And so that is a huge problem. And Harrisburg is in the mid to high 70s, which is really good. And that shows that local leadership is actually dedicated to reversing a lot of the trends that we've seen here. And so there is these glimmers of hope. The good thing is that you can really focus resources and attention on those things and get really high successful results. The problem is you do have local leadership that is apathetic to it, refuses to do it, or is really running counter to that. And obviously you've seen that in places in Pennsylvania. I've seen that in Washington, D.C. They just had a circus up at a congressional hearing saying that crime wasn't as bad today as it was in the 90s, so don't worry about it. While that was going on, there was a carjacking a half mile away from the Capitol where a Jeep Cherokee barreled into about 4 cars and almost hit a police officer, literally while the guy is saying that, which was, I'm sorry that it happened, but that is quite the irony of the whole thing. And so that's what we're trying to look for, and those are a little bit of the solutions that we're trying to preach at America's Prosperity through the Public Safety Solutions for America Coalition. And hopefully we'll see that kind of grow and spread not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country.
Greg, thank you so much. Well, last but certainly not least, I am so humbled to introduce our policy champion, Representative Mike Jones. Serving his 3rd term in the General Assembly, he represents the 93rd Legislative District encompassing part of York County. He was a top 5 score on our 2021-2022 legislative scorecard. 5 out of 253 members. So incredible work, keep it up. And has been a past recipient of our political endorsement. You know, many of us here talk about the real need for folks outside of the public sector to run for office. And that's exactly where this good member came from. In 2006, he was named president of St. Ange, okay. St. Ange, an international supply chain strategy and logistics consulting firm based in York. And under his leadership, that company more than doubled in size, was named one of the world's top 100 supply chain partners 7 times, and was named to Inc. magazine's 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the country each of the 3 years prior to his retirement in 2017. His inspiration to run for office was based on his belief that too many legislators are busy protecting their job rather than just doing their job. This is a member who pushes for a citizen government. He is led by example. He refuses both a pension and per diems. I can speak for everyone here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes. And so, Representative, a couple questions, and then the floor is yours. As a very conservative member, a relatively new member, what has inspired you to be such a leader in the space of criminal justice reform? Can you address kind of what PA should prioritize this legislative session on the criminal justice front that can help law enforcement, in focusing their resources on violent crime?
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate it. I was the most conservative 2 years in a row from American Conservative Union, so AFP needs to adjust the. Although I think my colleague Dawn Kiefer surpassed me the last year or two, and that's starting to annoy me a little bit. But anyway, there's nothing like being the most senior member of a panel while at the same time being the least impressive and least qualified member of the same panel. So it's pretty humbling being up here with these younger, much smarter individuals. So I want to talk a little bit philosophically, if I may, give you a little bit of pragmatic feedback from some of our law enforcement officials in York, which is a very red county with Republican leadership across the board. And then I'll end with a couple specific pieces of legislation to your question, Ashley, that I am supporting. When I talk about I ran for office with criminal justice reform, wasn't even on my radar screen. I'm a very tough on crime kind of person. My second or third month in office, the Democratic Black Caucus in the House had an event at the women's prison in Muncie outside of Williamsport, and I decided to attend that on Martin Luther King Jr. Weekend. And I was really moved and touched by that. And that has put me on a 4-year journey championing a bill called Dignity for Incarcerated Women, and I want to talk about geriatric parole in a minute. But when I talk about criminal justice reform, I always start or end with 3 things. I'm a businessman, I'm an American, and I'm a Christian. As a businessman, a lot of what we're doing is just bad business. 95% of incarcerated individuals will get out. Whether we want them to or not, they will get out. So it makes perfect sense to treat them with dignity and make sure we do all the things we can that they don't become a revolving door. The other thing is, in talking with conservative judges in my county, one in particular with impeccable credentials, he said, Mike, 75 to 80% of the people that I have to send to jail shouldn't even be there in the first place. They've got mental health issues, they've got drug issues. In the case of women, there's a disproportionate chance they were associated with the bad men. So we all acknowledge there's the 15 or 20% that should be put to death or should spend the rest of their life in prison. But we have a much larger population where that's just simply not the case. As an American, this is a land of second chances and opportunity, and I don't think any of us want to be judged on our worst day. And as a Christian, while I may not have done anything worthy of sending me to jail, rest assured I am in desperate need of redemption, just like everybody else, and I'll raise my hand first and foremost to that. Now, I'm not here to debate the death penalty or to have a religious debate, philosophical, but just from where I'm coming from and a little food for thought, because these things are not mutually exclusive. Christ spared the life, Christ forgave and spared the soul, saved the soul of the thief on the cross, but he did not spare his life, okay? Conversely, he also said, thou without sin, cast the first stone. And I bring those two kind of opposing kind of thoughts together with do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Specifically, if I knowingly, consciously kill 2 or 3 people in cold blood, if I rape a child or any other kind of horrific crime, I expect to be done to me the same thing that I would do to anyone else, and that is, in my personal belief, is to be put to death. I hope I can be forgiven, but that's different. There is something called justice. On the other hand, if I'm a female in an abusive relationship and didn't want to take a plea bargain because I have children at home, or if I was an 18-year-old young man that made a mistake as a getaway driver, I think I would want a little bit of mercy and a little bit of grace, the same that Christ extends to all of us. So with that said, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. You may not agree with everything I said, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive, the need for justice and the need for grace. And that's epitomized in the form of my Savior, in my opinion, and our God. So, and because a lot of this is an emotional kind of issue. Now, drilling down a little bit more, everything that, in York County, we have a fantastic district attorney, and I want you to remember this name, Dave Sunday. So I consult Dave Sunday. I consult his assistant, Tim Barker. I assault justices, the people that are the head of our probation, prison wardens. These are all conservative Republicans, and give or take, they all are aligned on these issues. We are wasting too much time and money incarcerating people who should not be there, or who have long since aged out of crime, or who we want to make sure they don't come back into the system. So that's kind of the idea behind this. And then specifically to kind of tie it into two specific bills, one of which with a lot of effort, and I learned a lot about what it takes to get a bill done, we actually passed unanimously in a Republican-controlled House. We ran out of time to get it through the Senate, and that is dignity for incarcerated women. Again, there's 10 or 15% of those women that are pretty ornery and probably ought to be there for a long time, maybe for the rest of their life. But they are still our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, and they need to be treated with dignity. Prisons weren't designed with women in mind, okay? So what this basically does is to ensure those that are deserving of visitation with their children. You can do some bad things and still be a good mother. It ensures that we're sensitive to things like, covering the cost of feminine protection and that sort of stuff. They're not going to be in a state of undress around male guards, so on and so forth. It's just common decency. And for many of them, this may be the best they've ever been treated. And again, trying to stop that revolving door and to take a lead as conservatives and truly be, extend that compassion that goes hand in hand with justice. They are not mutually exclusive. The other area, and I'm hoping obviously we're not happy that the Democrats are controlling the House, but it does give us an opportunity on, and I use the term fairly loosely, geriatric parole. And I'm interested to get your feedback afterward. But give or take, what it would say is if you have reached the age of 60 years old and you've served 30 years or more, you are at least eligible for parole. In Pennsylvania, we have mandatory life, not only for first degree, but for second degree murder. So you're not just talking about the worst of the worst, you're talking about the young kid who was an accomplice and made a mistake. This would simply say that you are eligible for parole. You would still, in a sense, serve out the rest of your sentence under probation, under that system. But these are 60, 70, 80-year-old, predominantly men, a few women, who have long since aged out of crime, who could be great role models in the community. And we've seen with the reform on juvenile lifers that the recidivism is extremely low, and they could be mentoring these misguided 18, 19, 20-year-old young men that most of us in this room have no credibility with and cannot, where our advice would fall on deaf ears. Yeah. So these are good common sense things. We would exclude the worst of the worst, but looking at those, and certainly nobody that's hurt children, because you don't age out of that, okay? You have grandparents that molest children, but you don't see them robbing banks. But we're talking about people that have served their time, have aged out of crime, good behavior, and should at least be eligible for parole.
I so appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us. As our time together comes to an end, I just want to honor the sacrifice of members of law enforcement who are in attendance. So let's just all give those guys and gals a round of applause. I want to thank all of you for being at PLC and being an essential part of a movement of action takers, not just keyboard warriors or diner whiners. You guys are the folks in the trenches, and we're just so grateful to you. I urge everyone, go out in the lobby, visit Americans for Prosperity's booth, meet our team. We have Emily, Mary Beth, Pete, Liz, Zig, we're all out there. We want to get to know you. I also ask each of you to visit KeystonePlaybook.com to learn about our legislative priorities in Harrisburg. Utilize the hashtag Public Safety Solutions. Tag your representative and senator for purposes of publicly lobbying them while simultaneously educating your sphere of influence. Representative Jones mentioned it. We have a divided legislature for the first time in over a decade. We have got to deal with reality constructively, and we've got to find ways to move Pennsylvania forward and get critical work accomplished. This agenda is a starting point toward real progress on the real problems of the moment. We look forward to partnering with any of you willing to do so. Thank you so much for being here.